I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise today to talk about prepayment meters, the cost of prepayment meters. There is a prediction that we are about to experience the longest winter in 50 years. Now is the time to consider what this will mean for the most vulnerable in our society. We know that in 2014 there were 43,900 excess winter deaths in England and Wales. And if this predictions translate into a long period of harsh weather, that figure could rise in 2015, 2016, unless we act to mitigate the effects. The UK Association for the Conservation of Energy estimated that almost 14,000 deaths over last winter could be due to people living in cold homes. Therefore, the most obvious area that we can act will be energy consumption, and in particular looking at prepayment meters, the cost of prepayment meters, and how they are put into people's homes, especially for those already experiencing fuel poverty. If we tackle this issue, we can alleviate part of the problem for excess winter deaths. More than 2,000 prepayment meters are put into people's homes every single day. And I would like to put on record my thanks to the CAB for their Fair Play for Prepay campaign. In my own constituency of Brent Central, just shows just how unfairly the cost of these prepayment meters are on poorer residents. I have one of the highest numbers of prepayment meters in the country. At 26%, it's 10% higher than the national average. And those on prepayment meters pay on average £226 more a year than those on the cheapest direct debit. You can get an idea of the scale of what this means to the local economy when I tell you that it costs £3 million to the local economy. And what's worse is that 80% of these prepayment meters are put in to claim debt back from the energy companies. So the energy companies basically subject poor people to higher rates. The cost of installing prepayment meters, it's almost like they're being punished again and again and again.
I'm very, very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and she is raising an extremely important point, particularly for those of us in London. She uses the expression prepayment meters being put in. Are you implying and are you stating to the House that the people living in these properties have no say in it, that they are being forced to accept these prepayment meters? Is that what you're saying?
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention. That is in some cases what happens. Some people come home, as Mr Hamilton in my constituency in Brent, came home to find that there was a prepayment meter installed without his knowledge, which would never have been the case. It is absolutely a disgrace that the energy companies do this. The poorest 10% spend almost 10% of their total household expenditure on fuel, and the richest 10% spend just 3% of their household income on fuel. And that's how I think it's a recognised term of fuel poverty. And according to Ofgem, those on prepayment meters pay on average £80 more than those on direct debit. And although this figure has reduced, it can still be, that differential can still be reduced much further. As the Minister will know, the Competition Markets Authority's provisional findings into the energy market released this July have raised concerns about the affordability of domestic energy prices, as they have continually outstripped inflation over the past 10 years. Yet at the same time, standards of service have dropped and complaints have risen. Now, under the Labour government, prepayment bills on average rose by just £17.50 a year. But during the last 4 years, the annual bill rose to an average of £63. And I believe that the government should make it clear to the big six energy companies that they must reduce the amount that those on prepayment meters pay for their gas and electricity. After all, these are vulnerable people who can least afford to pay that amount of money and those high costs. British Gas have kind of led the way. They've levelled out the amount that their customers on prepayment meters pay to the same as those on cash and credit. but they advised me that those paying direct debit will still be incentivised and pay a little bit less due to the reflectivity requirements, which is understandable, but more should still be done. All that needs is the willpower of these energy companies to do it. Yeah,
I wonder if my honourable friend has made any calculation about the amount of profit made by the big six energy companies, because it seems to me that what we have here is a case of Robin Hood in reverse. I mean, this really seems to me like the poorest in our society are actually having to pay and to subsidise the wealthiest. Has she done any work or made any estimate of the amount of profit accruing to the big six?
I thank my honourable friend. The big six make something like £600 million a year in profit. It's an enormous amount of profit that they make, and they can afford to treat the most vulnerable in our society much better than they actually do. I give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to the honourable members making a number of excellent points in this debate, and I thank her for raising this very important issue. Could I put to her that I'm aware of constituents in Glasgow South West who are paying more in standing charges in prepayment meters than they are in the actual energy consumption, and that should be regulated a lot tougher.
I agree with my honourable friend that the standing charges need to be regulated. To be honest, the whole industry needs to be regulated, and they can do a lot more, especially as I previously stated, we're about to enter into the longest winter in 50 years. I would also like to urge the Minister to encourage energy companies to follow in the footsteps of Scottish Power, who suspends the debt of their customers during the winter months, so that the amount of money that they put in to the meters goes directly on their usage of fuel. And to put that into context, Mr. Hamilton, in my constituency in Brent, would put £5 on his meter, and the energy company would take £3, and so he only had £2 worth of fuel. So if the Minister could feel, was able to encourage the energy companies, they could do this straight away with very little effort, but it will make a big difference to the people in the country. As the Minister will know, in 2016, we entered the enduring phase, which will ensure that all meters are smart meters by 2020. Therefore, it is important that we help inform people and those who are fuel poor. After all, as I say, energy companies will be making £12 million worth of savings with the implementation of smart meters. So surely we can look at the 2.3 million fuel poor households in this country. The energy companies are making enough money to be able to look after those who are fuel poor. I do expect the Minister to tell us that energy companies are not allowed to disconnect customers through the winter months. But what happens is the energy companies still install prepayment meters, and that means that people then self-disconnect because they can't afford to pay. So therefore, in effect, they are still being disconnected, they are still getting cold, and unfortunately, some still die. Give way.
I really am grateful, and I'll try not to trespass on my honourable friend's patience much longer. But on the subject of disconnection, is she aware that in some cases you can have long-distance disconnection, where people can actually be disconnected without a magistrate having to sign an order for the company to enter the premises to physically disconnect it? And in other words, one of those vital layers of protection for the consumer, particularly the vulnerable consumer, have been removed if it is possible to disconnect a power supply without even entering the premises.
Absolutely, and the installation of smart meters will make that even easier for this remote disconnection. But what energy companies have said that they will not do this. Obviously, it's whether we trust the energy companies enough to believe that this will not happen. But this is why we have to safeguard and protect the most vulnerable in our society. And it also means that magistrates have to be given clear information. And as a magistrate myself, I can tell you that we would normally get lots of warrants at the beginning of our sittings for us to sign off. And although magistrates ask quite clearly whether the energy company have gone through all of the safeguards, whether there's vulnerable adults at the property, whether there are people with mental health at the property, whether there are children at the property, and we are assured that that is so, I must say, on the occasions, I wasn't always convinced that the energy companies did their due diligence when asking for a warrant to enable to enter a property forcefully and install a prepayment meter, which will be more expensive for that person who has been least unable to pay the bill. So I talked about the high cost of prepayment meters and the self-disconnection, which is not often talked about by energy companies or this House, but it happens quite a lot. And recent research undertaken by E.ON highlighted that 7 in 10 people with prepayment meters had accidentally self-disconnected even when they weren't expected to do so. 7 in 10 is a very high number of people who have self-disconnected. And over the winter months, we expect that figure to rise. I believe that prepayment meters are being installed way too early in the debt plan, because what's supposed to happen is that the energy companies are supposed to go through a whole plan of what they can do to help their customer not be in that situation of fuel poverty. And I think the installation of prepayment meters happens way too early. And as we're entering the enduring phase, and by 2020, as I previously stated, that all meters will be smart meters, surely now is the time to slow down and end the installation of prepayment meters.
The honourable members were very generous. Does she also agree with me in some experiences I have had that the fuel regulator is toothless and effectively powerless in stopping energy companies installing prepayment meters early on, and that there's a role for the fuel regulator there, perhaps should be given more powers?
I agree. I think not only the fuel regulators should be given more powers, I think there should be a closer eye kept on what the energy companies are doing. And I also think that the magistrates' courts play a huge role in ensuring that the energy companies passed all the tests that they have to test before installing prepayment meters. And I actually think that the amount, which is currently set at something like £150, but £500 is the amount set so that stops people from switching to another energy company. I think the £500 figure should be the figure that energy companies should have to reach before applying for a warrant to install a prepayment meter, because it's just too easy to be able to get a warrant to install a prepayment meter, which means that that person on that prepayment meter plummets into more and more debt because they can't afford the amount that they have to pay. There are record profits being made by the big 6 energy firms year on year. And wouldn't the Minister agree that these increases in charges and actually the increases in complaints are just simply not good enough, and further action to protect the consumer, as my honourable friend mentioned, is absolutely necessary? And wouldn't the Minister agree that when DEC's own fuel poverty records find that 22% of prepayment users are in fuel poverty, that something needs to be done and quickly, especially with winter fastly approaching, if we're not already in winter? We could well witness a rise in self-disconnections and fuel poverty related deaths if we do not do something in the next few weeks. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I am sure that the Minister and I are on the same page on this issue. And to help the Minister in her response, I would like to summarise some of my requests. What would really help the estimated 11 million people on prepayment meters is that energy companies bring the cost of prepayment meters in line with those on the cheapest direct debit. It would also add £2.5 billion into the economy. I would also like to see greater protection for vulnerable adults and children when installing prepayment meters. This would mean clear instructions given to the Magistrate's Court. I'd like to see no prepayment meters fitted during the winter months. As previously said, that leads to self-disconnection. So in effect, the energy companies are still disconnecting vulnerable people during the winter months. And a suspension of debt during the longest winter in 50 years. That's this year, 2015, leading into 2016. All the above is completely doable, and a letter from the Minister could make this happen. Lastly, we are all aware that food banks have become a godsend to many in our country, and in fact, some people will be having a pretty lousy Christmas if it wasn't for food banks. I wish they didn't have to use them, but that is the situation that we are in. I want to thank the Trussell Trust and E.ON, who have teamed up to provide credit for struggling families who use prepayment meters, and I know that in my constituency in Brent Central, we'll be grateful for their services. But I do hope that the Minister and I will agree that this country can do more to help those who are fuel poor.
Yeah. Minister.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I genuinely would like to congratulate the member for Brent Central for securing this debate on cost of prepayment meters. I can assure her that the government is committed to helping households with their energy bills, and a great deal of the focus in my department in recent months has been on how to reduce consumer bills for everyone. It's an incredibly important point, and she's made it very well. We know that it's often some of the most vulnerable in our society who can end up with a prepayment meter. Whilst we're working with Ofgem to provide greater support specifically for those consumers, and I will come on to exactly what we're doing on prepayment meters, but I think it's also important to point out that we've also implemented a range of measures to support vulnerable households reduce their energy bills, including the Warm Home Discount Scheme, which provides direct assistance on energy bills to over 2 million low-income and vulnerable households each year. The government is also determined to help vulnerable consumers take advantage of the best deals available. And we know that many vulnerable consumers need additional help and advice to be able to engage with the market and take action to switch and save. So that's why DEC has been providing nearly £3 million over the last 3 years to fund the Big Energy Saving Network. The network is designed to help vulnerable consumers taking action to reduce their energy costs, with around half of participants reporting that they now spend less on heating their home because of their engagement with the network. It's reached around 220,000 people over the last 2 years, and we aim to reach a further 100,000 vulnerable consumers this winter. Helping people to insulate their homes is one of the best ways to help keep energy bills down. 1.3 million homes have benefited from energy efficiency measures, such as insulation and efficient boilers, under the energy company obligation between January 2013 and September 2015. The current phase of ECO will run to March 2017, but the government has announced in the spending review a long-term successor to ECO, which will continue for an additional 5 years from 2017 at £640 million a year, rising with inflation. That new supplier obligation will run from April 2017 to March 2022, reducing the impact of the obligation by around £30 for the average household from 2017 to 18 compared to current projections. But it will also upgrade the energy efficiency of well over 200,000 homes per year, tackling the root cause of fuel poverty, and we'll be setting out our plans for the scheme early in the new year. But the Honourable Lady has raised a very important issue. A significant proportion of households, around 17%, use prepayment meters. And although not all prepayment meter consumers are financially vulnerable, more than 60% of them have been installed due to debt. For some consumers in difficult circumstances, they do offer an alternative to disconnection for non-payment of energy bills, although we recognise that those consumers would rather not be in that situation. Still, others prefer prepayment meters because they find it helps them for budgeting for their energy expenditure and to keep track of what they're using, so consumers can build up credit in the summer months to reduce their expenditure over the winter. But we do know that paying by prepayment can be more expensive than paying by direct debit. And that is, of course, because there are further costs to installing prepayment meter customers, as well as additional services provided. But there are safeguards in place to prevent suppliers from charging unjustifiably high tariffs for a particular payment method. Suppliers are required to ensure that differences in charges really do reflect the costs they face to provide that payment method. And across the market, the cost of paying for the energy from prepayment meters is similar to the cost faced by customers who are paying by standard credit. The majority of suppliers offering prepayment meters do not charge when consumers agree to the installation, and this includes all of the big 6 energy companies. Others, however, as she points out, do pass on the charges that they incur from meter operators for installation. And these consumers can also face costs to have the meter removed once they're able to go back to having a credit account, which is on average between £160 and £180. Now, I can tell her that Ofgem is currently working with suppliers to identify and extend good practice to end charges for installing and removing prepayment meters. So what should suppliers be doing? Well, we expect to see suppliers meeting the obligations under their licence to only install prepayment meters where it's safe and reasonably practicable for the consumer to use them. Suppliers must take into account a customer's ability to repay when setting instalments to repay gas and/or electricity debt. I'm pleased to say that there is evidence to suggest that suppliers are fulfilling this obligation. Firstly, Ofgem keeps weekly repayment rates under review, and these have fallen on average in recent years. And secondly, the majority of indebted customers are on standard credit, not prepayment meters, and repay through a variety of different means, which suggests that repayment is indeed being tailored more to suit the needs of individual customers. Now, we do know that some customers who are concerned about their energy bills will self-disconnect by deliberately choosing not to top up, meaning that their supply will stop. And in those circumstances, it's absolutely vital that they seek help from their supplier as soon as possible. And I expect suppliers to have in place appropriate arrangements to protect their most vulnerable consumers and systems to identify any potential problems so that they can be rectified early. And I think the Honourable Lady made that point very well. I'm happy to give way to her.
Thank the Minister for giving it away. Just a couple of points. The rate of complaints have increased exponentially with energy companies because they are not taking into consideration the circumstances of vulnerable persons who are unable to heat their homes. And also in regards to switching, those people on prepayment meters have very little to switch to. So the benefit to them is something like 8%, whereas the benefit for those on direct debit is something like 22%.
I'm grateful to her for raising those points, and I will certainly look into her first point about she believes that there is evidence that, in fact, suppliers are not taking into account individual circumstances. As I say, I do expect suppliers to have in place appropriate arrangements, so if she wants to raise individual cases with me, I will look into them. But I can tell her that today, a dual-fuel prepayment consumer with average consumption living in London could save around £130 by moving to the cheapest dual-fuel prepayment deal in the market. So I do think that there is merit in switching, and I do urge all consumers, including those on prepayment meters, to look around and shop around. So my absolute focus remains on getting the best deal for consumers. I expect suppliers to treat their consumers fairly, and we expect to see suppliers making sure that any reductions in the costs of supplying energy are passed on directly to customers. Strong competition in the energy supply market is the best way to keep prices down, and the government is committed to ensuring that the market works effectively for consumers. I will give way.
Yeah, I'm very grateful to the Minister. It's just going back to the issue of self-connection. Has there been any discussion with our department and the Department of Work and Pensions as to any emergency help that can be given to someone in those circumstances?
Self-disconnection. Did the Honourable Gentleman say self-disconnection? These conversations are happening regularly. I will write to him with any specific changes that we are intending to make or consult on, but I can absolutely assure him that suppliers are required to take into account the specific circumstances of consumers. And as I say, Ofgem are looking into the issue of the cost to have prepayment meters removed, and whether that should be continuing for prepayment consumers. So I'd like to just move on briefly into the investigation into retail energy market currently being conducted by the Competition and Markets Authority. The CMA published its provisional findings and remedies in the summer. It has found that customers on standard variable tariffs are being charged unjustifiably high tariffs. The majority of prepayment customers, of course, are on standard variable tariffs. And we are committed to acting on the CMA's recommendations and to ensuring fair prices for all consumers, including standard variable tariff customers who use prepayment meters. The CMA also found that prepayment customers have fewer tariffs to choose from than customers paying by direct debit. But there are some indications that this is beginning to change. We're starting to see the development of smart prepay meters. E.ON is currently piloting a smart pay-as-you-go tariff for consumers using a smart prepayment meter who then pay the same prices as the company's standard credit customers. They expect to make that tariff more widely available to new and existing customers from next year. With OVO's pay-as-you-go tariff, prepayment meter consumers receive an in-home display which enables them to see how much energy they're using and when and how much credit they have left. Consumers can also add credit to their prepayment anywhere via app, text or online. We're also seeing examples of good practice by suppliers. So, for example, SSE's support for its vulnerable prepayment meters includes monitoring of prepayment consumers on the Priority Services Register to identify self-disconnection, and they will then call the consumer to check the situation and to make the offer of extra assistance where appropriate. And of course, finally, on smart meters, the government has a manifesto commitment to ensure that every home and business in the country has a smart meter by 2020, delivered as cost-effectively as possible. The rollout of smart meters is an important national modernisation programme that will bring major benefits to consumers and to the nation as a whole. Domestic customers will be offered an in-home display, enabling them to see what energy they're using and how much it's costing. Smart meters really have the potential to transform the experience of being a prepayment customer. Customers can top up more conveniently through a range of channels. Topping up a smart meter in prepay mode should become as easy as topping up a mobile phone. They're likely to herald greater and cheaper tariff choices for these customers as the cost differential will be reduced. Smart meters will enable energy suppliers to remotely take action to avoid disconnection, for example through switching consumers to credit mode, setting non-disablement periods, and configuring debt recovery amounts to be small. So a customer's ability to pay their energy costs whilst keeping warm are amongst the top concerns of my department, and we are fully committed to tackling these issues through a range of innovative policies. And I want to thank the Honourable Lady very much, and also to the Honourable Gentleman for their contributions to this very important debate. Thank you.
The question is this House now adjourned. As many of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.